My name is Jay Carter, and this story is about my ex-wife, Jennifer Telford. I won't waste your time with a long-winded romance about how we met or how effortlessly she could turn heads. What really matters is that we both graduated from the Stanford Graduate School of Business, a place where ambition wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. And we had plenty of it. I focused on operations, while Jennifer thrived in marketing. She had this uncanny ability to make anything sound irresistible, whether it was a product pitch, a half-baked business idea, or even convincing me that a hole-in-the-wall diner was a Michelin-worthy experience. After graduation, we took different career paths. She landed a marketing role at a major auto manufacturer, while I joined Kindle Technologies, leading software sales and research. 2 years into our careers, we got married. Nothing extravagant, just a small ceremony with family and close friends. Exactly how we both wanted it. Why blow a fortune on one day, Jennifer would say, when we can invest in something that actually lasts? That's what I loved about her back then. Her practicality. Life got busy, but we made it work. Our weeknights often turned into strategy sessions at the dinner table. What do you think of this campaign? Jennifer would ask, sliding her laptop toward me. Let me see. I'd scroll through her slides. It's strong, but the tagline feels a little generic. Maybe sharpen it. She'd tilt her head, eyes scanning the screen. You might be right. All right, Mr. Operations Guru, I'll tweak it. We were a great team, not just in our marriage, but in the way we challenged each other professionally. I respected her creativity. She valued my analytical approach. Then, after 5 years at the auto company, Jennifer started changing. One evening, while we sat on the couch with takeout boxes on our laps, she sighed. One of those long, exhausted sighs that made me put my food down. What's wrong? I nudged her with my elbow. Work, she muttered, stabbing a piece of chicken with her fork. I feel stuck, like I'm on autopilot. Have you talked to your boss? Yeah, she scoffed. They just dump more of the same projects on me. I need something bigger, something that actually challenges me. I turned to her. Then maybe it's time to start looking for something new. She nodded slowly. Yeah, you're right. I'll update my resume tomorrow. At the time, I admired her determination. I had no idea that one decision would unravel everything. Because less than 3 months later, my wife was named CEO of Kindle Technologies, the company where I worked. I remember the moment like it was yesterday. We were in the kitchen. I was making coffee, Jennifer scrolling through emails at the counter. Jake, she said casually, but something about her voice made me look up. Yeah. I poured the coffee, only half paying attention. I got the job. I froze mid-pour. Wait, what job? Her lips curled into a smile, the kind that carried both excitement and power. The CEO position at Kindle. My stomach dropped. I blinked, trying to process. The CEO position? At my company? You're joking. Nope. She stood up, eyes gleaming. They want me to run the company, Jake. Can you believe it? I set the coffee pot down, forcing a smile. That's amazing, Jennifer. Congratulations. And I meant it. At least, that's what I told myself. But inside, I felt like I had just been blindsided by a semi-truck. I had been at Kindle for years, building up the IT sales and research department, making it the company's top revenue driver for 4 straight years. I thought I was in line for the top job, or at least in serious contention. Still, this was Jennifer's moment. I wasn't about to steal it from her. I'm proud of you, I said, pulling her into a hug. I couldn't have done it without you, she whispered, but I should have known. Things were about to get complicated. Because the very next Monday, HR called me in. Jake, Clara, the HR manager, started with a polite smile. As you know, having a spouse as your direct superior can be complex. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. We trust your professionalism, she continued, but leadership wants to ensure that boundaries are maintained, both at work and at home. I clenched my jaw, nodded again. Because here's the thing. The problem wasn't just that my wife had been promoted over me. It was what came next that I never saw coming. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, but inside, I felt like I was being treated as a liability. Reporting to my wife? That was fine. Awkward, sure, but I was determined to keep things professional. The real problem wasn't Jennifer, or even the HR lectures about maintaining boundaries. It was someone else entirely. someone she had insisted on bringing with her. Enter Alastair Parker. At first, I told myself I could handle it. Jennifer wanted Alastair as her assistant? Fine. That was her decision. But then, HR dropped a bombshell. Because of company policy, spouses couldn't report directly to each other, which meant I wouldn't be answering to Jennifer. I'd be reporting to Alastair instead. It's just a formality, Clara from HR had assured me with a polite smile. You'll still be working closely with Jennifer. It didn't feel like a formality. It felt like a gut punch. But when I brought it up at home, Jennifer brushed it off with a reassuring squeeze on my shoulder. It's just on paper, Jake, she said. You'll still be working directly with me. It's just HR nonsense. I wanted to believe her. I tried to believe her. But things didn't unfold the way she promised. A few weeks later, during a routine board meeting, I got hit with another surprise. We've been reviewing the company's structure, one of the board members announced, glancing at his notes. And in the interest of streamlining operations, we've decided to reassign the IT sales and research department. I sat up straighter. Reassign? That department was my work, my success. The chairman turned to Jennifer, who picked up where he left off. Effective immediately, IT sales and research will now be under Alastair Parker's leadership. I felt the air leave the room. My department, my team, my years of work, handed over to Jennifer's assistant. The chairman kept talking, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Jake, we'd like you to step in and oversee the after-sales support department. It's an area that needs urgent attention, and your leadership could really make a difference there. I barely heard the rest. My mind was racing. My gut was screaming the truth. I had to get out. That night, I typed up my resignation letter and sent it to Alastair. The irony stung. Just weeks ago, he was nothing more than an assistant. And now, I had to submit my resignation to him. When Jennifer found out, she wasn't happy. You're resigning? She asked, her voice sharp as we sat across from each other at the dining table. Jennifer, this isn't what I signed up for. I met her gaze, my voice steady but firm. You gave my entire department, my years of work, to Alastair. And now you expect me to clean up the mess in after-sales? What's the point of staying? She sighed, rubbing her temples like she was trying to hold back frustration. Jake, I need you to reconsider. This isn't just about you. It's not a great look for your career. And honestly, it's not great for the company either. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, now she cared about my career? If that were true, you wouldn't have let this happen in the first place, I said, shaking my head. Her tone softened, like she was trying to explain something to a stubborn child. The after-sales department is a disaster, Jake. You're the only person I trust to fix it. It's an important role. I leaned forward, my voice dangerously calm. You could have added it to my workload, but you didn't. Instead, you stripped me of everything I built. And then she said the words that changed everything. Jake, I had to give Alastair a department. She exhaled, like she was admitting something she didn't want to say. The board wouldn't approve him as my assistant unless his role was justified. I froze. I stared at her, really stared at her. So to make his position look good, you took away mine? My voice was eerily quiet. You don't sacrifice your best employee to make space for a new one, Jennifer. Especially not for someone who has no clue how to do the job. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Jake, stop. This isn't personal. I let out a slow breath. My hands clenched into fists under the table. Not personal, I repeated. I built that department from the ground up, and you threw me aside like a placeholder. She squared her shoulders, her CEO mask slipping into place. If you insist on leaving, she said, voice firm, you'll still have to serve the mandatory 90-day notice period if you want the company's recommendation. My stomach twisted. She wasn't speaking as my wife. She was speaking as my boss. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth, then gave her a slow, tight-lipped smile. Sure, Mrs. Telford, I said, deliberately using her last name. I'll do what's professional. A flicker of something. Regret? Frustration? Flashed across her face. But I didn't wait to analyze it. I stood up, turned on my heel, and walked away. For the first time since this nightmare started, I had absolute clarity. This marriage wasn't just in trouble. It was over. This isn't about playing nice, Jake, Jennifer said, her tone firm. Alastair will learn. The team is strong. They'll manage just fine. I scoffed, unable to hold back my frustration. Manage? I snapped. The team follows their leader, Jennifer. And with a leader who has no clue what he's doing, they're going to fail. She folded her arms across her chest. I'll make sure Alistair is trained properly. By you. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, so now I have to train him? That's the plan? He takes my job, and I get the privilege of teaching him how to do it. No, she said, her voice sharp with authority. You'll still report to him, but you'll train him to handle the department. I leaned in, my voice dangerously calm. Let me get this straight. You want me to report to the guy who took my job, and then train him to do it? I let the absurdity hang in the air before continuing. Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds? Jennifer's expression softened slightly, like she was trying to reason with a child. Jake, this isn't about you. It's about what's best for the company. A sharp, humorless laugh escaped me. Oh, so now I'm not what's best for the company? I shook my head. Your most profitable employee is on a notice period because of your stupid decision, and you have the nerve to talk about what's best for the company? She let out a slow breath, clearly trying to keep control of the situation. Jake, I need you to do this. I stared at her for a long moment, then smirked. Fine, I'll train him. Her eyes flickered with relief, until I added, on one condition. She frowned. What condition? You inform the board that this is part of my 90-day notice agreement. Otherwise, her posture stiffened. Otherwise what? I leaned back in my chair, my voice cold. Otherwise, for the next 90 days, I'll take your golden boy Alistair around the company and make sure he learns everything. Everything except his actual job. For the first time since this whole mess started, Jennifer looked rattled. Her face paled, her hands gripping the table. You can't blackmail me like that, she said, her voice sharp with indignation. I met her glare with unwavering confidence. Try me. Silence stretched between us, thick with tension. Then, without breaking eye contact, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my email. In fact, I said casually, here, take a look. I turned the screen toward her. Her eyes scanned the messages, and I saw it. The barely audible gasp, the way her lips parted in shock. 5 job offers. I watched the realization sink in as I leaned back, letting satisfaction seep into my voice. All paying more than Kindle Technologies. I paused, then added with deliberate emphasis, and guess what? Not a single one of them requires a recommendation from you or anyone else here. Jennifer's mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, she was silent, staring at the screen as if she could will the emails away. I slid the phone back into my pocket and stood up. Since you've decided I'm expendable for your boy Alistair, go ahead. Let's see how you explain this to the board when they ask why I resigned. I didn't wait for her response. I turned and walked out, my steps firm and deliberate. For the next 3 days, I threw myself into my new role. I wasn't about to waste my notice period sulking in a corner. No, I was going to prove a point, to Jennifer, to the board, and most importantly, to myself. It didn't take long to figure out the root of the problem in the after-sales department. It wasn't performance. The team wasn't lazy. They weren't incompetent. They simply didn't understand the products they were supporting. If you don't know what you're talking about, I told them during one of our morning huddles, how do you expect the customers to trust you? They nodded, some hesitantly, others with visible relief. It was clear they wanted guidance, and I was more than ready to provide it. We're implementing a mandatory training program, I announced. Every employee in this department will undergo training on our latest products. No exceptions. There was a buzz in the room. Apprehension, curiosity, maybe even a bit of excitement. I didn't care. I had a job to do, and if nothing else, I'd leave Kindle Technologies with this department running better than it had in years. I was reviewing the final arrangements for the training sessions when my phone buzzed. An email. A summons. Report to the conference room immediately. I sighed, slipping my phone into my pocket. Here we go. When I walked in, the tension was thick. The room was packed with the company's board members, their faces serious, unreadable. And at the head of the table, poised as ever, was my CEO wife. Jennifer's gaze met mine, and for the briefest moment, something flickered in her eyes. Determination? Frustration? Maybe both. The managing director, Ronald Kindle, leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. His voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of concern. "Why have you resigned, Mr. Carter?" he asked. "You've been with us for a long time. Why give it up now?" I didn't blink, didn't hesitate. "Give me a good reason to stay," I said. Silence. A flicker of surprise in his eyes. He cleared his throat. "The company has been good to you, Mr. Carter." A sharp chuckle escaped me before I could stop it. Not out of amusement. There was none left. Good to me? I leaned back, folding my arms. Out of 13 departments, I was leading the most profitable one. Not for a year, 4 consecutive years. Yet I was removed from my position and sent to the one no one wanted. A muscle in Ronald's jaw twitched. It could have been a challenge I'd have welcomed, if it had been handled properly. "But tell me, Mr. Kendall," I continued, my voice steady, "if I was as valuable as my record shows, why wasn't I even consulted about the change?" Silence. And for the first time since this all began, Jennifer looked away. Why wasn't it discussed with me? My voice was firm, cutting through the heavy silence in the conference room. Why not add it to my existing responsibilities instead of stripping me of my role? No one answered. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and telling. I let my words linger before continuing. Instead, I was asked to give up a department of 100 team members to take over one with just 25. Let me ask you something. Would you willingly give up a larger, successful team to take over a struggling, smaller one, without so much as a discussion or a choice? Still, nothing. I caught the uneasy glances exchanged among the board members, their gazes flicking between Ronald, Kendall, and Jennifer. She shifted in her seat, about to speak, but I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "I'm not finished yet, Mrs. Telford." Her mouth snapped shut, her lips pressing into a tight line. I turned back to Ronald. "You said this company has been good to me, so let me explain exactly how good it has been." I leaned forward, resting both hands on the table. "I was told to report to a man, Alistair Parker, who has less experience than I do. A man who has never led a department in his life. His biggest professional achievement? Being the assistant to a CEO. And when I resigned, do you know what the company's response was?" I let the sarcasm drip from my voice. No one asked me why. No one asked if there was anything that could be done to change my mind. The only thing I was told was to serve the mandatory 90-day notice period. Silence. Uncomfortable shifting. Lowered gazes. "Please, Mr. Kendall, don't treat anyone this good ever again." I turned and walked out, the weight of the room's silence following me. As I made my way back to my office, something gnawed at me. Why was Jennifer so determined to push Alistair into this role? Why risk performance and morale just to put him in a position he wasn't qualified for? The thought had crossed my mind before, but I had been too distracted by my own career unraveling to focus on it. Now, though, the pieces didn't add up. I needed answers. Years at Kindle Technologies had taught me one thing: information is power. And I knew exactly who to talk to. I pulled out my phone and called Ashley, one of my most trusted former team members. We met in the break room. Ashley's eyes darted toward the door as she sat across from me. "Ashley, I need you to be straight with me." I kept my voice low. "What's the deal with Jennifer and Alistair?" She hesitated. "Jake, I don't know if I should." "Ashley, please." I leaned in. "You know I wouldn't ask unless it was important." She sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look, it's just office gossip, okay? But people have noticed how close Jennifer and Alistair are. Really close." A cold feeling settled in my gut. "Close how?" Ashley hesitated again. Then, finally, she said it. "Some people think they might be involved. Romantically." The words hit like a punch. I stared at her, my mind racing. "Romantically?" She nodded. "They spend a lot of time together behind closed doors. And any time someone questions Alistair's decisions, she defends him. It's unusual." I leaned back, trying to process what she had just said. If what Ashley hinted at was true, it explained everything. Her insistence on putting Alistair over me. Her willingness to risk the entire department for him. Her complete indifference to my resignation. But I needed proof. Speculation wasn't enough. I needed facts. Hard evidence. And I knew exactly who to call. Jake Sullivan. His voice hadn't changed, gruff, sharp, no nonsense. "Jake, it's Carter." There was a pause. Well, damn. Long time, man. What's going on? I need a favor. His tone shifted. Sensitive? Yeah. My office in an hour? Perfect. An hour later, I sat across from Jake Sullivan, an old friend and one of the best private investigators I knew. I told him everything, Jennifer's decisions, the rumors about her and Alistair, the sudden changes at Kindle. Jake leaned back, studying me. So, you want me to keep an eye on Jennifer? I nodded. And Alistair. I need to know if there's anything going on, professionally or otherwise. Jake exhaled, rubbing his chin. You sure you want to go down this road? My jaw tightened. I have to. Because if there was nothing, fine. But if there was something, then this wasn't just about work. This was about my marriage. Jake nodded, his expression serious. All right, Carter. I'll find out the truth. And just like that, I set something into motion that I couldn't take back. All right, I'll start tonight. But I'll need access to her phone and laptop if we want the full picture. That won't be a problem, I said, an idea forming in my mind. That night, after Jennifer had fallen asleep, I made my move. My hands were steady, my heartbeat not so much. Using a spare USB drive and a few tools I'd learned about over the years, I accessed her work laptop and mirrored the data onto the drive. The screen flickered as files transferred. Emails, documents, meeting logs, every keystroke feeling like a betrayal, yet one I had no choice but to commit. Next was her phone. A quick trick Jake had taught me bypassed her lock screen, and within seconds, I had set up remote access. For a brief moment, I felt like Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible, pulling off a covert operation right in enemy territory. A mix of anxiety and adrenaline coursed through me as I worked, my mind racing with possibilities. Once everything was in place, I sent Jake a message. Phone and laptop are ready. My job was done. For now. But sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thoughts churning. What would Jake find? What if there was nothing? What if there was everything? The next morning, I was up early, forcing myself into my usual routine. Jennifer emerged from the bedroom, looking cheerful. Too cheerful. There was a bounce in her step as she greeted me with an unusually warm smile. Good morning, Jake. Morning, I replied, raising an eyebrow. Her sudden shift in demeanor felt off. Too rehearsed. Too intentional. She walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. I was thinking, maybe you could drive me to work today. I blinked. You have a company car, Jennifer. Why would you need me to take you? She shrugged, her tone light. I just thought it'd be nice to spend more time with my husband. You know, drive together like old times. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. And when exactly did you come to that realization? She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Alistair and I talked about it yesterday. He thinks I should make more of an effort to spend time with you. I froze. My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. Oh, so now an outsider is telling you what to do in our marriage? I set the cup down deliberately slowly, locking eyes with her. That's wonderful, Jennifer. Truly. Do you make business decisions the same way? Some guy comes along, gives you an idea, and you just run with it? The sweetness in her expression evaporated instantly. Her face hardened. You see? I knew you'd ruin this. She threw her hands up. I told Alistair you have too much pride. I let out a bitter chuckle. Oh, did you? My voice dripped with sarcasm. And what else did you tell Alistair? My food preferences? My sleep habits? How I like things in bed? Maybe even how my farts smell? Her face twisted in anger. She stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. I sat there, shaking my head. Unbelievable. With a sigh, I grabbed my briefcase and headed for the office. For the next 3 days, we barely spoke. She didn't try to reach out, and I sure as hell didn't bother either. We were strangers now, trapped under the same roof. The growing void between us was suffocating. A small part of me wanted to confront her again, to demand answers. But what was the point? Every day, it became clearer. I'd already lost her. To Alistair. Somehow, he had influence over her. Maybe even control. But why? That question gnawed at me. And by the time the fortnightly board meeting rolled around, I buried my personal troubles under layers of professional focus. This was my chance to prove that my efforts in the after-sales department were working. I walked into the boardroom with a detailed presentation, ready to show them the numbers. The usual faces were there. Ronald Kindle, the managing director. The board members. Jennifer, my CEO wife, sitting smugly next to Alastair. I cleared my throat and began. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share the results of the training initiative we rolled out last week. As you know, the department was struggling with customer satisfaction metrics, but I'm pleased to report a significant improvement. The Net Promoter Score has risen from 12% to 28% in just 1 week. A few murmurs ran through the room. Some nods of approval. Good. They were paying attention. I pressed on, detailing the improvements, the training protocols, the newfound efficiency in handling customer concerns. This was the proof. And then, Jennifer interrupted. Those numbers are not correct. Her voice sliced through the room, sharp and unwavering. I stopped mid-sentence, turning to her. Excuse me? She leaned forward, her gaze cold. The NPS has improved, yes, but not to 28%. It's only at 14%. Your data is incorrect, Jake. Lies. I clenched my jaw, forcing my voice to remain steady. Jennifer, I verified these numbers myself. Before I could continue, Ronald Kindle raised a hand, cutting me off. Mr. Carter, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. This has never happened before. Please double-check your numbers, and let's reconvene on Friday. I nodded tightly, swallowing my frustration. Of course, Mr. Kindle. I'll have everything ready by then. But I already knew the truth. She was undermining me. She wanted me humiliated. That night, I packed my belongings and moved out of the bedroom. I couldn't share that space with her anymore. Not after what she'd done. The humiliation, the betrayal, the lies. It was all too much. And for the first time in our marriage, I realized something. This wasn't just falling apart. It was over. I sat up in the guest room, tossing my bag onto the bed with a long, exhausted sigh. Moments later, I heard Jennifer's heels clicking sharply against the floor as she walked through the house. She was home. Then, silence. I didn't need to see her to know the moment she noticed my absence in the master bedroom. And just like that, the storm arrived. She stormed into the guest room, her face a mix of anger and confusion, her arms crossed over her chest. What is the meaning of this? She demanded. I stood up slowly, meeting her gaze with an icy stare. Jennifer, I said, my voice cold and steady, you humiliated me for the last time today, but I promise you, I will return the favor. So be very, very careful in the next meeting. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't say a word. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. My numbers were correct, I continued. Never in my career have I presented incorrect data. Not once. I don't know what your game is, but I promise you this. I will get to the bottom of it. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, stopping her. And since there's clearly nothing left between us as husband and wife, I added, my tone hardening, I see no reason to share a bed with you anymore. Her expression twisted with frustration. Jake, this is ridiculous, she snapped. You're overreacting. A bitter chuckle escaped me. Overreacting? I tilted my head slightly. You might want to let your boy Alastair know. I'm sure he'll be thrilled. Now there's no longer a need for pretense. I paused, my words deliberate. He's already replaced me at the office. I have no doubt he'll be happy to replace me in our marriage, too. Her face drained of color. Then I slammed the door in her face. The next day, my phone buzzed. Jake. His voice was serious, almost grim. Jake, we need to meet, he said. I've got something you need to see. My gut twisted. I met him at a quiet cafe, and the moment I sat down, he slid a folder across the table. Brace yourself, he warned, his expression grim. I hesitated, then opened the folder, my hands trembling. And what I saw shattered me. Photos, videos, Jennifer and Alastair, in a motel, kissing in the parking lot, tangled up in ways no married woman should ever be with another man. My stomach dropped. My heart turned to stone. Jake placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry, Jake, he said quietly. You deserve better than this. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight. I forced myself to say something, anything. I didn't think she'd actually. I swallowed hard. I suspected, but this? Jake nodded, his expression dark. You can't let her get away with this, man. He pulled out a business card and slid it toward me. Kelly Lawson, the best divorce lawyer in the city. An absolute shark. You're gonna need her. I stared at the card, my vision blurred with rage. Then I slipped it into my pocket. Thanks, Jake, I muttered, my voice hollow. Jake leaned in closer, his voice low and firm. Wreck her, Jake. Don't let her walk all over you. I nodded, though the fire in my chest felt like it was about to consume me. That night, I couldn't go home. I checked into a dingy motel, tossing and turning all night, my mind replaying the images over and over. The betrayal, the deception. By morning, my resolve had hardened. In the next meeting, I would make her pay. Friday arrived. I walked into the conference room 5 minutes early. The air was thick with tension. Jennifer sat beside Alistair, both of them waiting. The moment I entered, her eyes snapped to mine. Why haven't you been home for the last 3 days? She asked. I paused, tilting my head slightly. Is that a question for me, Mrs. Telford? Her eyes narrowed in annoyance. Yes, Jake. Where were you? I leaned back in my chair, smirking. Is that your question, Mrs. Telford? Or does your assistant here want to know where I've been? Before she could answer, Alistair shot up from his chair, his face red with anger. Be respectful, Jake, he snapped. I turned my gaze to him slowly, letting my next words drip with venom. Or else what, Mr. Parker? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. If you're trying to threaten me, I'd be more than happy to take this conversation outside the office. I let the words hang. Are you man enough for that, Mr. Parker? Are you? Silence. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall. I watched his confidence crumble, his face paling. Then, before anything else could unfold, Ronald Kendall walked in, followed by the rest of the board. His cheerful demeanor clashed sharply with the tension in the room. Oh, everyone's here already, he said, settling into his seat. He turned to me with a curious smile. So, Mr. Carter, are the numbers correct this time? I smiled. Cool. Composed. I leaned forward slightly and replied. Sure, Mr. Kendall. This time, I have everything in place. I stood, moving calmly to the front of the room. And then, with absolute confidence, I began my presentation. The Net Promoter Score has now risen to 29%. And this time, Jennifer couldn't stop me. A significant jump from the previous 14%. My voice was clear, my tone unwavering as I presented the results. The carefully laid out slides backed up my claims, and I could feel the room's attention locked onto me. But, predictably, Jennifer interrupted. The numbers are wrong, she declared, her voice sharp and commanding. Before Mr. Kendall could respond, I raised my hand, stopping him. Hold on, Mr. Kendall, I said firmly, keeping my gaze locked on Jennifer. It would be unwise to make any statements until I've finished. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly sank back into his chair, signaling for me to continue. I turned to the screen, my expression calm but cold. Let's clear up any doubts right now. With that, I navigated to the live NPS portal, downloading the raw data from the past 2 months. Right there, in front of everyone. No filters. No edits. Every board member leaned forward, eyes glued to the screen as I performed the calculations step by step, making a direct comparison that left no room for argument. By the time I finished, the numbers stood for themselves. My numbers were correct. I looked straight at Jennifer, her face growing visibly uncomfortable. Care to explain, Mrs. Telford? I let the question hang in the air. The supposed error in my calculations, perhaps you'd like to enlighten us? Or, in case you can't find a fault, would you care to explain how the CEO of this company could have such disastrously incorrect data? Her composure cracked. Her face paled. Her lips parted as if scrambling for an excuse. She glanced around the room, searching for support, for a way out. Then, in a desperate move, she turned to Alistair, her last refuge. Did you check the numbers before giving them to me? He froze. His expression was unreadable, but his silence was deafening. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smirk forming. Oh, so it was Mr. Parker, I said, letting the words hang like a guillotine. I turned to him, my gaze sharp, unwavering. Mr. Parker, I began, my voice calm but dripping with contempt. You're heading the most profitable department in this company, and yet you can't perform simple calculations? That's not just embarrassing, it's dangerous. A heavy silence settled over the room. Every set of eyes darted between Alistair and me. I let the tension simmer before turning to Mr. Kindle once again. Now, Mr. Kindle, I continued. I never doubted Mr. Parker's incompetence. He's been proving it quite effectively on his own. But what I fail to understand is how you could appoint a CEO so utterly out of her depth that she clings to an incompetent man like he's some kind of designer handbag. The room went deathly quiet. I wasn't done. I took a slow breath, locking eyes with Jennifer as her face drained of color. And as for you, Madam CEO, my voice sharpened. Since it seems you're blinded by whatever sparkle Mr. Parker brings into your life, let me present you with the cold, hard facts. With a single click, I opened the sales portal and projected the numbers onto the screen. The downward trend was unmistakable. Like a train wreck in slow motion. Sales have plummeted by 13%, I announced, my tone cutting through the room like a blade. And overall research productivity? Down by 53%. Gasps rippled across the boardroom. Board members exchanged horrified glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. I turned to them, my voice steady and cold. At this rate, the research department will have to shut down by December. And by July, the company's sales will dip into negative territory, taking its profitability down with it. I looked at Jennifer. She was visibly sweating. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table, her perfect CEO mask crumbling. Then, I let my next words cut deeper. I'm sure everyone is wondering, why is Madam CEO so blindly protecting Mr. Incompetent here? Jennifer shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Alistair's face hardened, his jaw tightening. I nodded slowly. Well, allow me to answer that for you. With calm precision, I reached over to my laptop, opened the media file, and hit play. The room fell silent. And then chaos. On the screen, a video played. Jennifer, Alistair, caught, in a motel, kissing, tangled up in ways no married woman should be with another man. Gasps erupted. Board members recoiled. And Mr. Kindle's cheerful expression hardened into one of pure shock and outrage. When the video ended, I closed my laptop. Deliberate, calm. Then, I turned to Mr. Kindle, meeting his stunned gaze. So, reporting to a spouse is unacceptable, I said, my voice razor-sharp. But screwing your assistant is perfectly fine? His face turned a deep crimson, his mouth opening and closing, speechless. I pressed on. The way I see it, Mr. Kindle, I continued, Madam CEO used her position and influence to manipulate this board into removing me from the most successful department in this company, just so she could install her lover as the head of it. I turned to the board, letting my words sink in. Did Madam CEO happen to mention to you that she wanted me to personally train my so-called boss to do my job? I paused, watching as the board exchanged uneasy glances. Silence. I guess she didn't. I turned back to the screen, pulled up the financial figures, and pointed to the glaring losses. $2.5 million in lost sales and revenue, I stated flatly. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for your CEO and her incompetent assistant to lead this company into a downward spiral. I straightened, arms folded, letting the weight of the numbers and the betrayal settle over the room. Then, I spoke the final words that sealed her fate. I hereby rest my case. The silence was deafening, thick with tension, disbelief, and the aftershocks of truth I had just unleashed. Then, with measured calm, I added, now, I had planned to complete my 90-day notice period. But given the circumstances, given the fact that this company's CEO attempted to destroy both my career and my reputation, I'll be leaving effective immediately. I closed my laptop, placed it on the table, and slid it across. The IT department can pick this up from here. Without another word, I turned to Alistair, who was glaring at me from his seat, jaw clenched, face burning with humiliation. I stepped forward, looked him dead in the eye, and said, and this? This is my punch-out. Then, I threw a single, calculated punch. It connected squarely with his jaw, sending him stumbling back into his chair. The room erupted with shocked cries, the chaos echoing as Alistair clutched his face, his eyes wide with pain and rage. I calmly adjusted my tie, unbothered. Then, I turned to Jennifer, who was frozen in place, her face drained of all color, her eyes wide with panic. I took a slow step forward, my voice as sharp as a blade. "The divorce papers will be served to you in your office, Mrs. Telford." Her breathing hitched. "And don't bother coming home." I let the words sink in. "I've already sent your things to your boy toys place." Her lips parted, but no words came. I pivoted back to Mr. Kindle, locking eyes with him as I delivered my final blow. "And as for you, Mr. Kindle, I'll be suing this company for failing to enforce the fraternization clause." His face turned beet red, his mouth opening and closing, scrambling for something, anything, to say. "Have a nice day." With that, I straightened my shoulders, turned on my heel, and walked out of the conference room. I left behind stunned silence, shattered egos, and the remnants of a kingdom built on deceit. The day Jennifer was served the divorce papers at the office, I made it a point to stay clear of her. I didn't need to see her reaction to know it had crushed her. That same afternoon, Mr. Kindle was handed the lawsuit papers. The moment he opened them, he looked as if the weight of the world had landed on his shoulders. Good. It was about time he faced the consequences of his inaction. A couple of hours later, his office called. He wanted to see me. When I walked in, he was no longer the confident, commanding man he had always been. His tone was no longer firm. It was pleading. "Jake," he began, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's be reasonable here. The company doesn't need this kind of publicity. How about we make you an offer? We'll drop everything. No hard feelings. And well, you take the CEO spot. Effective immediately." A laugh escaped me. A small, bitter chuckle. "Mr. Kindle, you think I want to take Jennifer's chair?" I asked, shaking my head. "To sit where she sat, knowing what this company allowed her to do?" I leaned forward, voice sharp. "No, thank you. I have no interest in cleaning up the mess you all let happen." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "All right," he said, shifting in his chair. "How about damages? We'll offer you $5 million to drop the lawsuit." I leaned back, pretending to consider it. Then I smirked. "Not interested. Yet. Let's see how things play out. I'll get back to you when I'm ready." For the next 7 months, I kept the negotiations going, never committing, but always keeping the pressure on. I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. Meanwhile, Jennifer and I went through the motions of divorce. She tried to fight at first, but there was no room for negotiation. Eventually, she gave up. When it was finalized, our assets remained untouched. I didn't want her money. I didn't want anything from her. I just wanted her out of my life. Once the divorce was settled, I finally called Mr. Kindle. "All right," I said over the phone, my tone casual. "Mr. Kindle, I started my career with you, so you deserve some respite from me. I'll take $2 million to drop the lawsuit. Nothing more, nothing less." A long pause. Then, a sigh of relief. Done. Just like that, it was over. Jennifer? She disappeared from my life completely. Last I heard, she had taken a job as the head of marketing for a small company in Dubai. And Alistair? His fall was even more satisfying. Jennifer kicked him to the curb not long after the boardroom incident. Now, he was working as a sales rep for a toothpaste company. I almost felt bad for the guy. Almost. As for me, I moved to Singapore and took on a new role as CEO of a fast-growing tech company. I threw myself into my work, avoided relationships, not because I was bitter, just focused. Life is good. And most importantly, I never looked back. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.